Hello and welcome to Beyond the Words. Our guest today is Morana Perić. She's been working in localization for more than 15 years. Previously, she worked at the travel booking sites Booking.com and Get Your Guide, and then she was head of UX content and localization at the taxi app FreeNow. She's now director of localization at DeepL. So welcome, Morana. Just to start us off, could you tell us a little bit about your background and what sort of drew you to a career in languages?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, what drew me to languages? I had a pretty, let's say, eclectic approach in my interest in education. So when I was in school, I was interested in like physics and languages and humanities. So, you would say like completely different things. But I think today also with the advent of the LLMs and all of this, maybe not so different. And yeah, somehow I ended up going with humanities. I studied languages and literature. And, when I was in college, I had this idea that I'm going to stay in academia and, deal with literary criticism and all of that. So I was really interested in that. And then I started translating a little bit and like got into my first corporate job, and then I think it just kind of took a hold of me, and I started, I just continued working at this nice cushy full-time job, and yeah, stayed in localization through most of it. I think maybe depending on how you view localization or how you think of localization, I've been like in and out. So I worked also on the content side, more like producing content, like copywriting, editing. I also worked in UX. So I think they're very similar, and I've also worked in teams where they were all together, which I think actually is kind of the best way to organize it. But yeah, that's a little bit of my background.
And you were mentioning LLMs, how things have changed, and you know it firsthand because you work at DeepL now. And I'm really curious because when you're head of localization at DeepL, it's a bit like being the chief counsel in a law firm. You're under a bit of scrutiny. So can you tell us a bit what it's like to use DeepL at DeepL, how your localization strategies are impacted by the tool, and vice versa, and then do you think about strategy differently than your previous roles?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you asked this because we actually started even like a webinar series and let's say a talk series. So I talk a lot about this. We have a series called DeepL on DeepL. And yeah, we talk about how my team uses DeepL, but also how other teams in the company use DeepL. So it's something that we love talking about. I think like maybe to start, to understand how we strategize around this, I think it's important to start with content strategy, not like, I think in localization, we often start when localization begins, but I don't think that's a good approach. Like you have to start a few steps before and understand what is the content strategy. So what do you want to achieve with this specific piece of content? What is the purpose of this content work stream? Or like, what is the purpose of this campaign? What is the impact? Like, how many people are going to see this? What are, maybe if you want to get very specific, like what are the metrics that you want to have for this piece of content? And then you decide on the localization approach of it. And this is how we also use DeepL, right? So we do use DeepL, of course, but how we use it, we apply this, let's say, content strategy to it. And we actually use kind of this quadrant, but maybe for the sake of simplicity in the conversation, I could explain it in let's say you have low stakes content and high stakes content. And high stakes content would be, any big campaign, like you're doing a big product launch, you need to do a whole campaign around it. You have some out of home advertisement. You have a lot of, you have a lot of blog posts. You have a lot of media around it. This is very visible. This is very important. This is the piece of content where you will maybe sit for hours and strategize and think about how you're going to localize it. You maybe come up with 7, 8 versions of it, and you present it back to the creative team, and you ask them what they think about it. And maybe you do even some research if you have time with the local audience. So this is the part where you invest a lot of, let's say, human effort, right? And then you have some content that comes with this as well, but maybe it's not so visible, it's not so important. So let's call this low stakes content. Doesn't mean that it's not valuable. It just means that maybe it's not so visible. And for this type of content, sometimes we will just DeepL it and publish it, right? We won't even touch it. We won't even post-edit it. And that's for several reasons, right? Number one is that we do believe in our product and we believe that it does a good job. But also the way this content is written often is very, kind of pliable to AI translation and machine translation. It's pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of like nuance and depth. Like if you think of like a FAQ page or help center, or like very practical content types like this, they work so well with AI translation, with machine translation. So for example, this type of content, we apply DeepL and we send it out. And yeah, we haven't had complaints so far. So yeah, that's a little bit of how we strategize. And then of course, it's not a black and white. There's many types of content in between. So we try to assess based on what this content does and based on how we align with the stakeholders. We try to also adjust the approach. Like sometimes we will DeepL, post edit, check a little bit if it's needed, and then we will publish it. Sometimes we will actually DeepL it and publish it, and then maybe we will come back to it if we realize that something became more important or is gaining more traction. So there's like, let's say, a lot of parameters that we use, but yeah, it's a little bit of a palette of flavors of how we use DeepL.
I think that I find that really interesting because we know how AI is changing the industry now, and probably better than anyone else, but. What I find fascinating is that you look at the use case. So you start with, what's the need? What's the target audience? What's the actual type of content? So you start with a use case, and then you think, is our tool good for this? Or do we put the focus more on the human element? Or can we just trust our tool 100%? Or can we find somewhere in the middle where we use the tool, but we have post-editing? And there's so many people who think, okay, we'll go 100% AI and then we'll trust it, completely blindly, and end up with sometimes really embarrassing situations almost. And maybe they've got a lesson to learn there from the people behind AI-driven machine translation.
Yeah, and it's just one of those common misconceptions in the industry. Like people think that localization is something simple or content is something simple and all content is the same. And then because all content is the same, let's just apply the same strategy to it. But, maybe because I worked also on the creative side, on like the UX side, on the content side, I know this is not true. And I think we all know in localization that this is not true. And like the same approach that you do in the creative teams, you should replicate basically in localization. If they wouldn't just use ChatGPT to create the biggest tagline that they print on the billboard, then why would we machine translate it, right? It's very much the same. So yeah.
I'm wondering, because you were talking about like what you just said about starting with the content rather than starting with localization. We were actually talking to a client yesterday who works on the localization team of a really big company, and she was sort of complaining to us about feeling treated like an afterthought. But then presumably when you're working at a company that's building this tool, like everybody at the company is aware of the tool and what it's good for and what it can do, and about what localization is for. So you maybe, I don't know if you've sort of had fewer problems like that working here than at your previous jobs.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good call out, and I definitely felt this. This is one of the reasons why I was also very excited to take this job. It's nice to work in a company where everybody knows at least a little bit about localization and what it does. And I think it puts us definitely puts us in a more visible position, in a position where you can advocate more easily, where you can get the ear of people more easily. But also I think it makes our role as the localization team a little bit more interesting. I think you asked, Bruno, what is how do we apply maybe different strategies, and I think in that sense also maybe a different role for our team is a little bit of this we're kind of like this customer within the company team. We're like dream within a like inception team, right? We're inside of a company that does this. And then, we also act sometimes as like a consultants. Let's say we're developing a new product, they will come to us and say, hey, how would you use this? Do you use this? What do you use? How do you do this? We act sometimes as alpha testers for some products. We help with ideation sometimes. So it's a very interesting place to be, I think, in localization in this way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a dynamic where you're also your own client.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned in your sort of LinkedIn bio that you love talking about what good localization really means. So I thought we'd give you a chance to talk about what you think, what that means to you, really, what good localization means. And also, you've talked a little bit about this already, but how does AI and machine translation factor into what good localization means?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, what good localization really is understanding, so kind of breaking down these silos in which the companies function, and just going away with some of the industry misconceptions. So the misconceptions are that localization is just something, right? It's just translating this and then you're achieving localization, right? Or it's just this thing that this one team does. And in reality, it's a complex system, right? And this is where we get a little bit like, I'm a big systems thinker. I'm a big fan of this discipline. I think you kind of have to be a little bit of a systems thinker and a systems thinking advocate to be in localization. But it's a complex system, and the entire business ecosystem should participate in this. They should be at least aligned strategically that this is, what the company is doing now. It's a global company. You're working in all of these markets. And everybody should be doing localization in their own way. And I think sometimes even, some of the teams that I've managed would sometimes be like, oh, why are they doing this now? This is our job. Like, we should be doing this. And I'm always like, no, if everybody wants to participate, it's really about the mindset on operating globally. So every team should be ideally aware. A product team should know that their users are not just English-speaking users, and they very often forget, right? They have this one user in mind, and then this is, the user that probably speaks their language, which is mostly English. Marketing sometimes also doesn't understand that, a good campaign in Germany might not resonate in Brazil. Engineering, engineering is such a big partner always for us. They also need to understand what it's like to write code for internationalized software, sales support, like, do you have these functions in these countries where you're operating? So I would say, I guess what I mean is, like, it's easy to translate a website, but I don't think that's really localizing it, and that's not really localization, right? If you take a look at how a business should operate. And then to your kind of next question of where AI fits into this, I mean, I would kind of refer back a little bit to our, like, how we use DeepL, but also to expand a little bit on this, I think localization it's always going to be scale, right? If you decide to localize, if you decide to go in global markets and localize, it's always going to be doing something at scale, because you add one language, and you're not just adding one language, you're adding a language to all of this content, so it multiplies so many times. Like, it just gets crazy, right? You add 20 languages and you're already in this super complicated, complex system. And at the scale and at the pace at which businesses operate today, it's impossible to do this without AI translation. So I think this is something that you just have to embrace, and you should embrace as a business if you're going global. But you have to know where to use it and how to use it in the best way to preserve your brand, to preserve your, your reputation, to sell in the right way, to market in the right way. So there's definitely a place for AI localization or AI translation, I should say, in the business. But yeah, it's absolutely knowing when and where to implement this, and how to distribute it, and where to invest time and where to save time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and from what you're saying, I think there's it shouldn't be an afterthought either. It shouldn't be like that thing that comes right at the end of the process, where for a marketing campaign, for example, and we were talking about working with sales, with marketing, with software development. And it's almost like, in software development, there's that shift left approach where they say, well, the security of the code should be, right from the beginning, rather than like we develop code and then there's security at the end. I think in localization, we should do the same as well. And we're quite far from that at the moment in most organizations, where, localization should be thought about right at the beginning of the process. If we take a marketing campaign as well, for example, because sometimes we receive stuff and you think, okay, how am I going to localize that now? And we're given a bit of a job, and almost like to make an impossible job and doing damage limitation on something that maybe we could have done a better job had we been involved more earlier on in the process.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's at the end, it kind of comes down also to communication. I had an interesting experience when I managed both the creative, like copywriting team, and the localization team. And we worked a lot with local marketing teams, and they would sometimes come to my creative team and say, hey, can you not be so so nuanced in the campaign. Like we want this to sound good when it's translated into Polish or whatever. And I was like, I understand. I really understand. I'm also on this side. But we also shouldn't limit the creatives, right? What we have to do is bring the localization people in early and explain the concept to them, so they also have the same freedom and time, which is very important. Like sometimes you would have the freedom, but you wouldn't have time to do this, to basically recreate, right? To transcreate this campaign for this market. So it's just about communication and understanding what is the goal of this piece of content, and then doing this. But yeah, this is often forgotten, absolutely, especially in the way we operate now, where so many things are last minute. Even the creative teams are sometimes given incredible deadlines and incredible pressure to deliver something, and then by the time it comes to us, it's already overdue. So yeah.
Yeah, and it really leads to my next question here, because I saw on your LinkedIn profile again that you said that storytelling is the most underrated skill in business. And I mean, we love a good storytelling, especially in the world of localization. And where do you think the gaps are now in storytelling? How can people use storytelling more?
Yeah, that I love that you asked that, because I love talking about it. I actually do a workshop on storytelling. I just managed to do it a few weeks ago for a really nice conference back in Croatia. And I trace my love for storytelling, I think, back to my roots of like wanting to be a literary critic. But I think it's just also probably like the dichotomy of like, having this background and then working in corporate for the past 15 years, I realized how people just don't know how to engage an audience with a story. Like we've just become very dry at like how we talk about things, how we present, even sometimes how we market our products, which really shouldn't be. And stories are something that we are, as humans, biologically programmed to react to. Like a brain reacts to stories physically with different emotions and with hormones. And it's just something that, when you look at the beginnings of civilization, like people were gathering around the fires and listening to stories. It's the basis of religions and everything. So it's super important if you really want to reach your audience. And somehow people, I don't know, out of thinking that, it's more efficient not to tell a story, but just present, I don't know, pure numbers or talk about, oh, this is my product, this is what it does. We've kind of lost this. And I think there's probably several reasons for it. I think so. Part of what makes a good story, this is like basic, let's say, storytelling 101. You have to have a character, you have to have some kind of a hero, right? Somebody needs to be at the center of the story, and they need to go through a certain predicament, and then they need to go go on this journey. You can call it like a hero's journey. This is the most typical story, and come out of it on the other end somehow, relieved or like recuperated or redeemed, and I think people the probably don't like to be vulnerable. They don't like to open up. They don't want to tell their personal story, which is one of the most efficient ways to tell a story. Like if let's say you're starting a business, and you want to tell the story of your business, telling a story of yourself and like how you ended up doing this business, like what motivated you, what were your your troubles along the way, your failures, like talking about all of these things. This is what people will connect to, but people just don't do it sometimes. And yeah, I guess part of it is just the courage, I think, to open up and be vulnerable, and part of it is just thinking that people won't respond to it, when actually they will. There's really scientific evidence that if you tell a good story along with your campaign, with your brand, it's going to be way more efficient. So yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right, because I was talking about LinkedIn, where you posted this, and you see on LinkedIn as well, there's a lot of humble bragging, and and just like you go through it, and then suddenly
Right.
somebody opened their hearts, and saying, look, not everything's well in my world, etc., etc. And that's usually the ones that get forwarded, that get so many likes, that go viral, basically, because it's genuine, it's authentic, and it's just cut through the crap, if you pardon my French.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's the authenticity, I think, and people just connect to it. It's really and it's fun. It's also fun to listen to. I mean, not every story is fun, but it's way more fun than listening to a quarterly report, of all the numbers.
Totally. And it's very comforting too. It's just like, oh, I'm not the only one, and I think we should all be a bit more like that.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, it's difficult because we primarily work with B2B, and I suppose DeepL is probably mostly B2B as well. There's an instinct to be really safe, and to sort of sell things the way that you think that their brand is already perceived, whereas like sometimes it is more effective to just be a bit more personal, a bit more vulnerable and disruptive, as they like to say in the tech sector.
Yeah, we actually had a conversation around this at some point, around who is your customer when you're doing B2B. And it was interesting for me as well, because this is the first time I worked for a B2B company. All of the companies I worked before were more, where there were marketplaces, or they were some kind of apps, but it wasn't actually B2B. And then we had a long discussion or workshop on this. And I mean, to cut a long story short, it was basically, well, even though it's a company on the other end, people who are listening, they are also people. They are not, it's not the company listening. So they also will react to this, right? You also have to address people in some way. So yeah.
Definitely. So we're going to end on a question that we end all of these podcasts on. We ask everyone the same question, which is, so you are Croatian and you speak English, obviously, and I believe you also speak German and Italian. Is that right?
I do. I speak Italian. I used to speak it pretty well, but it's getting rustier and rustier. I speak Spanish, and German is my newest acquisition, but I don't know. I'm still struggling with German, to be honest. I'm gonna have to double down. My son is gonna start school soon, and I'll be lost.
He's gonna be German.
Yes.
So if you could start learning a new language now that you haven't tried to learn before, which one would you choose and why?
If I had the time, I would work on my German to perfect it. That's my wish. But if somebody gave me, all this time in the world and said, like, learn whatever language you want, I would learn a language that is kind of completely different than all of the languages that I speak. So it would be either Japanese or Korean or Arabic, let's say, something that's like very different. Because I always wanted to learn this. I kind of dabbled a little bit with Japanese, and when I was in college, I started learning it, and then it just kind of slipped away. But I just think they're fascinating because of, it's a completely different syntax, completely different grammar, and I would love to challenge my brain to start thinking in this way a little bit. So yeah, which is probably a different part of the tree.
Well, Japanese and Arabic are quite popular with our guests. You like to, so there you go.
Nice.
Well, thank you very much, Morana, for your insights. I found really particularly interesting to hear how you guys approach localization and how insightful it is. Thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.